At my dad's retirement speech he said, "I owe it all to my sons. My daughter never had what it takes." Everyone clapped. I stood up, handed him a wrapped box and said, "From your biggest failure." Then I left. When he opened it he started yelling. The moment he said, "I owe it all to my sons," I felt my grip tighten around the box in my hands. I wasn't surprised, just numb. The room clapped like they'd rehearsed it. My brothers beamed, soaking in the praise. I stayed near the back, exactly where he expected me to be. The venue was grand. Crystal chandeliers, velvet chairs, and a stage dressed in gold. It was the kind of place Dad always loved. He liked things that sparkled, especially when they reflected well on him. I walked in alone, wearing a navy dress I'd picked carefully. Not too bold, not too plain. Just enough to be noticed, if anyone cared to look. They didn't. My brothers were surrounded by colleagues, old friends, and business partners. Their kids ran around in suits too small for their shoulders. Their wives exchanged compliments and wine. I stood near the entrance, watching the scene unfold like a play I wasn't cast in. One of Dad's old associates walked past me and said, "Didn't know you were coming." I smiled. Neither did he. The seating chart confirmed everything. My name was scribbled at the far end of a table labeled, "Extended Family." My brothers had their own table, centered, decorated, and reserved. I didn't sit. I stood. I wanted to see it all from a distance. Then the lights dimmed and Dad took the stage. He looked proud. Confident. Like a man who believed he'd done everything right. He started with a joke about retirement, then moved on to his legacy. "My sons," he said, "have always been my strength." The crowd nodded. "They've led with honor. They've built empires. They've made me proud." I waited. Then came the line. "My daughter never had what it takes." The room didn't flinch. Some laughed. Others clapped. A few looked at me, then quickly looked away. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just stared at him, standing there, rewriting history with a smile. I remembered a birthday when I was 8. Mom had ordered a cake with all our names. Dad picked it up and brought it home with mine missing. "It's just a cake," he said. "Don't be dramatic." That night, I cried in the laundry room while my brothers played with their new gifts. Back in the hall, I took a breath and stepped forward. The box in my hand was wrapped in matte black paper with a silver ribbon. Simple. Elegant. Intentional. I walked past the tables, past the whispers, past the stares. Dad saw me coming and smiled like I was finally playing along. I stopped at the podium. He leaned in, expecting a hug or a toast. I placed the box in front of him and said, "From your biggest failure." Silence. The kind that hums in your ears. He looked at the box, then at me. Confused. Embarrassed. Maybe even afraid. I turned and walked away. My heels echoed against the marble floor. I passed the same associate who had spoken earlier. This time he didn't say a word. I reached the door and stepped outside. The air was cool. Crisp. I walked toward my car, parked near the edge of the lot. I didn't rush. I wanted him to open it. I wanted him to read it. I wanted him to feel it. Then I heard it. Yelling. His voice, sharp, loud, unraveling. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I knew what he'd found. Inside the box was a framed letter. One he wrote to Mom years ago. I found it after she passed, tucked inside a drawer she kept locked. It read, "I wish we hadn't had her. She's not like the boys. She'll never be enough." I had kept it for years. Not out of bitterness but out of clarity. It reminded me of who he was. Not the man on stage but the man behind closed doors. I had considered burning it once. But something told me to wait. Tonight was that moment. I reached my car and sat inside. My phone buzzed. A message from my brother. What was that? I didn't reply. Another message. You embarrassed him. I turned the phone over and let it rest face down. I drove home in silence. No music. No calls. Just the hum of the engine and the weight of everything I'd left behind. I passed the diner where Dad once refused to eat because the waitress complimented me. "Don't fill her head with nonsense," he'd said. I was 10. I remembered that night clearly. Mom had whispered, "You're more than he'll ever see." I didn't believe her then. But tonight I did. When I got home I made tea. Chamomile. The kind Mom used to make when things got tense. I sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker. Somewhere in that hall, Dad was probably trying to explain himself. Maybe he was denying the letter. Maybe he was blaming me. It didn't matter. The truth was out. And for once it wasn't buried under charm or reputation. I wasn't the girl trying to earn his approval anymore. I was the woman who handed him the truth. And walked away. That night I slept without tossing. Without replaying conversations. Without wondering what I could have done differently. I had done exactly what needed to be done. Not for revenge. Not for drama. But for closure. The party was over. And so was the silence. I woke up the next morning to sunlight creeping through the blinds and the faint hum of traffic outside. My tea from last night sat untouched on the windowsill, cold now. I stared at it for a moment before picking up my phone. No new messages. Just the same ones from my brother, still unread. I didn't feel like replying. I didn't feel like explaining. I walked into the kitchen and opened the drawer where I kept old keepsakes. Things most people would call sentimental. Mine were different. A faded photo of me at age 6, standing beside a science fair project. I had won first place. Dad had taken the photo but never showed up to the award ceremony. "It's just a school thing," he'd said. "Don't expect me to clap for glitter and glue." That photo stayed with me. Not because of the win but because of the look in my eyes. Hopeful, waiting, unaware of how long that wait would last. My brothers were always the stars. Football trophies lined the living room shelves. Their names were etched into plaques at school. Dad wore their achievements like medals. Mine were tucked away. I once got published in a national journal. He skimmed it and said, "You write too much. No one likes a know-it-all." I remember sitting in the backseat of his car when I was 15, holding a certificate from a regional math competition. He glanced at it and said, "You should focus on things that matter. Like being presentable." That day I stopped showing him my wins. College was my escape. I worked 2 jobs, studied late into the night and earned a full scholarship. I graduated with honors. The ceremony was beautiful. Flowers, speeches, proud families. Mine sent a text. "Congrats. Don't let it get to your head." I saved it. Not because it meant anything but because it reminded me of everything. I built a career from scratch. No family connections. No handouts. Just grit. I pitched a product idea to a panel of investors and walked out with funding that changed my life. The news covered it. My name was in headlines. My brother sent a group message. "Nice. Must have been a slow news day." Dad replied, "You probably got lucky." That night I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine and stared at the city lights. I wasn't angry. I was done. I realized I had spent years trying to be seen by someone who had already decided I didn't exist. So I started collecting. Not awards. Not praise. But pieces of truth. It began with a box of old letters Mom had kept. She had always been quiet, gentle, the buffer between Dad and me. After she passed, I found a drawer in her closet. Locked, hidden behind scarves. Inside were letters, photos, and a small cassette recorder. One letter stood out. It was dated 2 weeks after I was born. Dad had written, "I don't feel anything for her. She's not like the boys. I wish we hadn't had her." I read it 3 times. Then I framed it. The cassette held a conversation between him and Mom. He was frustrated. "She's too opinionated," he said. "She'll never fit in. She's not what I wanted." Mom had replied, "She's exactly what she's meant to be." He had laughed. I listened to that tape once. Then I stored it in a safe. I found photos of me as a child, cut out of family albums. Literally. The edges were jagged. In one only my arm remained. I remembered that day. A picnic. I had spilled juice on Dad's shoes. He had yelled. Later the photo disappeared. Now I knew why. I gathered everything. Letters, recordings, photos. I didn't know what I'd do with them. But I knew they mattered. They were proof, not for others but for me. Proof that I hadn't imagined it. That I hadn't exaggerated. That I had survived something real. One evening I visited my childhood home. It was empty now. Dad had moved to a condo. The house felt smaller. I walked through each room, touching walls, remembering moments. The kitchen where I learned to cook because no one else would. The hallway where I sat after being grounded for speaking up. The garage where I cried after he told me I'd never be wife material. I found an old notebook in the attic. It was mine. Inside were drawings, poems, and a list titled "Things I'll Do Someday." One entry read, "Make Dad proud." I crossed it out. The box I gave him at the party wasn't just a message. It was a mirror. A reflection of everything he tried to erase. I wrapped it carefully, choosing the frame, the ribbon, the paper. I wanted it to look elegant. I wanted it to look deliberate. As it was. I didn't expect him to change. I didn't expect him to apologize. I just wanted him to see it. To hold it. To feel the weight of his own words. I imagined him opening it. Reading the letter. Realizing it was his handwriting. I imagined the silence that followed. The discomfort. The unraveling. That was my gift. Not revenge. Recognition. I wasn't the shadow anymore. I was the truth. And he couldn't erase that. I stared at the two letters side by side. One written in bitterness, the other in reluctant admission. They didn't scream. They didn't beg. They just sat there, framed in quiet defiance. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still. Like something had finally settled inside me. That day I didn't go to work. I stayed home, made myself breakfast, and opened the windows. The breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the neighbor's garden. I let it fill the room. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to prove anything. Not to him. Not to anyone. Around noon, my aunt called again. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. He's not well. You should talk to him. I deleted it. She had always played mediator, smoothing over his sharp edges with soft excuses. He's just old-fashioned, she'd say. He means well. But meaning well doesn't erase damage. Later that week, I ran into my cousin at the grocery store. She looked uncomfortable, fiddling with her keys. I heard about the party, she said. I nodded. She hesitated. Was it necessary? I looked her in the eye and said, it was overdue. She didn't reply. Just walked away. The writing group became my sanctuary. Every Thursday evening, we gathered in a cozy bookstore tucked between a florist and a coffee shop. The owner, Miriam, always had tea brewing and soft jazz playing in the background. I shared pieces of my story, never names, never specifics. Just moments. Feelings. Truths. One night after I read a passage about the letter, a woman named Clara approached me. She was in her 60s, wore a green scarf, and had eyes that carried decades of silence. That was my dad too, she whispered. We sat together for an hour exchanging stories like old friends. Her father had told her she was too much. Mine had said I was not enough. Different words. Same wound. I started journaling again. Not for anyone else. Just for me. I wrote about the time Dad refused to let me join the school trip because girls don't need adventures. I wrote about the day I got my first paycheck and he said, don't get used to it. I wrote about the silence at dinner tables, the absence at milestones, the way he looked through me like I was fog on a mirror. One afternoon I received a call from an unknown number. I answered. It was his secretary. He's been asking about you, she said. I didn't respond. She continued. He's not himself lately. I thanked her and hung up. That evening I walked past his old office building. It was being renovated. The sign with his name had been taken down. I stood across the street watching workers carry out furniture. A man wheeled out a box labeled personal files. I wondered if my name was in any of them. Probably not. Weeks passed. The calls slowed. The messages stopped. The silence returned, but this time it was mine. I chose it. I owned it. One Sunday my youngest brother invited me to lunch. We met at a quiet cafe with wooden tables and mismatched chairs. He looked tired but lighter. I've been thinking, he said, stirring his coffee. About everything. I listened. He told me he had started therapy. That the letter made him question things he'd buried. I used to think you were dramatic, he admitted. But now I see you were just surviving. I nodded. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But something shifted. A bridge began to rebuild, not over guilt but over understanding. Months later I received a package. No return address. Inside was a photo, me at age 5 sitting on Dad's lap. I didn't remember the moment. But the expression on his face was distant. Like he was posing for someone else. Behind the photo was a note. I found this. Thought you should have it. No signature. Just the gesture. I placed the photo in a drawer. Not out of sentiment but out of closure. That winter I was invited to speak at a local event about resilience. I hesitated. Then accepted. I stood on a small stage, lights warm against my skin, and shared my story. Not the drama. Not the revenge. Just the journey. The silence. The voice. The truth. After the talk, a teenage girl approached me. She wore a denim jacket and had chipped nail polish. My dad says I'm too loud, she said. But I think I'm just brave. I smiled. You are. The framed letters remained on my wall. Visitors sometimes asked about them. I'd say, they're part of my story. No more. No less. One spring morning, I walked past the bakery Dad once refused to enter. It had changed owners. The new sign read Grace and Crumbs. I stepped inside. The smell of cinnamon and vanilla wrapped around me. I ordered a slice of cake. Chocolate. Rich. Decadent. As I sat by the window, fork in hand, I thought about all the birthdays, graduations, and quiet victories he had missed. I didn't feel bitter. I felt full. Not because of the cake, but because I had finally tasted freedom.